Recently, I have purchased a $5,000 computer setup about that range. It's not exact, but it's about. And it is an Alienware gaming desktop. It comes with the new 3090 GTX. That was pretty cool to get in there instead of being out of stock. Wanted to build my own PC, but didn't want to wait for the 3090 to come back in stock. And there's also a 10900KF processor in there, 10 core, and 64 gigs of RAM inside the computer as well, along with a 2 terabyte NVMe SSD. Really nice stats, and I was playing Doom Eternal just fine, you know, and then I play on ROBLOX and it just kind of goes to garbage. And I really wanted to see the performance of my computer compared to the average and most popular Roblox games out there. I will be doing various tests all the way down from Adopt Me to first person shooter games, and I will be doing these on graphics 1 and graphics 10, and just really only paying attention to the frames per second, not so much of the CPU usage or anything like that. I really wish that Roblox would care more towards like the high-end PCs, because a lot of our developers have high-end PCs, but unfortunately it just doesn't perform that great on Roblox, because I think it's very limited on how the engine of it works. But let's get into testing. Let's see how we do. First game on the list is Room 2. Yes, this is still an alpha testing, by the way, so please be aware that these can even increase further. But look at the amazing details in game, and really just everything paid attention to the guns as well as being the maps. And on max graphics, I was getting around 160 frames to 200 frames, which is not that bad considering how greatly detailed this game is. It was running pretty smooth for the most part. Didn't really have too many major divs as in terms of game performance wise. On the graphics one, I got such a huge boost. It was going all the way up to 500 frames per second. Of course, it does look a bit iffy in the background and guns don't look amazing, but this is what you get for graphics 1. Although it does dip down to the 200 range as well sometimes when you're using certain guns. And that's the issue with Roblox really, is that if you're firing something or using something, it can majorly affect your performance on games compared to, let's say, real games. You're just firing a bunch of stuff and it won't really dip a whole lot in performance wise. Realistically, I should be getting thousands of frames easy in all these games, so I'm not really going to criticize the game devs that much. More so, I'm going to pin the blame on Roblox themselves, but I will still rate the devs optimization on these games. And for Room 2, I give it around a 10 out of 10 for the amount of details put in and still achieving 140 frames per second. That's what I really want to achieve the looks for. I run on a 2K 144Hz monitor, and I really want to get at least 160 frames. And Room 2 does a nice job of consistently hitting that number and above. Next up is going to be Arsenal. I have had issues before. My previous tests were not that great. I am going to blame the problem a bit on Roblox, but also a bit on Roll for not really doing a fair job on optimization. But as you can see, I'm getting around, it looks like 300 frames per second being the average. Is not dipping down to the 180 range. On the one graphics, I'm getting nearly around 400 frames per second, and it seems to be the average of 300 frames per second, which is really, really nice. I'm on the map Beach, which this map is for sure like detailed. It's not at all going to be something low end. And I'm still getting roughly about the same frames. Remember, this is on max graphics now. I'm going to be enabling all the graphics on because those were mostly with the stuff turned off. So viewport, particle physics, as well as ragdolls as well. Let's see our frames now on graphics 10. This is where we start running into some problems. So with all that enabled, I'm only getting around 100 frames per second. The lowest I've seen it be is like around 9. So this is actually really, really bad. And the only time where the frame rate was around like, 140 was when I died and everything was a bit calmed down. On graphics 1, it's gonna be around 200 frames per second, which is not terrible, But when you turn all that stuff on, you do want to play on max graphics. So currently I'm in Criminality right now, and the frames per second are jumping around from 130-ish all the way up to 210-ish. I believe the average is going to be around 160, and it looks pretty nice. I'm not really getting too many problems. This game is not that detailed as Rim 2, but it does have some nice touches to it via the map and also the guns as well. Graphics 1, the game doesn't look too bad. The only issue I'm having is, of course, rendering, but other than that, the graphics are still there. They seem okay. And for the frame rate boost, this is probably much worth it. Although I have just dipped down to 130, so it is kind of hard to tell how stabilized this actually is on Graphics 1. Now it's time to really test out these frames by slicing 10 people in a row. So far the frames seem pretty stable. All I'm really getting is server lag, but that's generally about it. Other than that, it seems generally okay. This game is actually really great on performance. Only dipped down so far to the lowest of 120 frames. This is actually not that bad. And Phantom Forces is playing this very highly detailed map, and as you can see, the guns and animations are nicely done. They're not too great though. And the average frames per second I'm getting is around 200 frames. It's actually not that bad for the amount of details going on, although I did just dip down to 130. Let me go ahead and shoot my gun and let's see how much the frames drop. It drops to around, probably around 5 frames, not that much. Pretty sure there's just something going on in the background, but overall pretty good high-end stuff. The game looks amazing, and I'm getting around 200 frames per second with so many players in the game. This is at least a 16-player server. That is really nice to see. Now I'm gonna go ahead and turn the graphics down a bit lower. Let's see what we get. We're getting around the 300 frames per second now, and it's not dipping down to the hundreds at all. It is dipping down to the 240 range, I think is what I see on the lowest end. But I mean, that's not that bad for Graphics 1. Now let's spice things up by enabling everything that has to do with graphics wise, and let's go ahead and put this to the real test. On Graphics 10, it doesn't really seem to be much of a dip. I'm still getting roughly about the same frames per second. It's not that much of a problem. See how when I shoot, it dipped down a bit, but it's not actually that bad as I thought it would be. It's actually very playable still, and I think it's doing a pretty good job for what it is. It still feels nice despite me spamming around this stuff. Like, I'm seeing dips like 120 frames per second, maybe around that range, and the average probably around 140, which is still really good compared to Arsenal for what's all going around. All these stuff flying off the maps and shaders and lightning, sparks of that nature as well, particles just in general. It's just really, really nice. On Graphics 1, I'm getting about 300 frames per second. This is where the render problem starts to become an issue. You can see players just behind a white background because this map is a bit too big. It really depends on the map that you are playing on. You can see like the back flickering basically as it just renders constantly back and forth. Anyways, I'm getting around 300 frames per second, 240. And then when I shoot through walls and stuff like that, it seems to be dipping only down to 190, which is a huge improvement. Really nice stuff right there. Adopt Me is not really a game that you wanna play for frame really dependent stuff because it's Adopt Me. You don't need insane frames to be really good at this game. It's not dependent on fast reflexes, but I still want to test it just because this is a front page game. On max graphics, it seems like we're getting around 200 frames to 300 frames, not dipping down below to 100 frames. Although I'm going to go to an area where the map is much bigger and there's a lot more of moving parts, and we can see our frames immediately dip down to the 80/90 range. Again, I'm not really going to rag on the devs for this because it's mostly Roblox in the first place for having such limited game engine and things of that nature. But I'm really getting around 100 frames per second. Let's go and put it down to Graphics 1, and we're going to see ourselves getting not that much of a boost compared to other games. I'm barely getting 200 frames. It's mostly going to be around the 160 range. It looks like dipping down to the 130 range. This is actually not that bad considering for what Adopt Me is. It's mostly tailored towards kids. I don't see why I would care so much about frames per second on this game. I am playing Tower of Hell right now. We are R6 characters, by the way. And there's not really a whole lot going on in terms of guns or items. It's mostly just going to be map parts that are moving around. And these are all solid colors, no decals, not too many meshes really. It's going to be parts. And we see ourselves getting around 500 frames per second, dips down to around a 290 range. But overall seems amazingly performance-wise, really good stuff. And on graphics one, I should be getting around... I actually did not increase a whole lot. It's just more so stabilized now. I am not dipping at all down below to the 400 range unless I move my camera around and stuff like that. Then it starts to play around. But doesn't seem to be dipping down whatsoever to the 300 or even the 200 range. So Tower Hell is looking really nice. And as performance-wise, I would give this a 10 out of 10 easy. But to be fair, there's nothing really complex going on. Just some plain moving bricks. And depends on which map you get as well. This one is not that big. Now, this one is called The Tower Hell, which all the levels are inside the game and crap. Still, it performs really nice. I'm not really seeing too much of a dip, despite there being a lot of parts. But to be fair, again, there's not really too many decals. And not really a whole lot of meshes either. On graphics 1, it is going to be pretty much the same thing, but more stabilized now.